In the early 1970s, Britain was changing fast. Cities were growing, suburbs were expanding, and crime was becoming more organized and more violent. Yet one of the most dangerous criminals of the decade didn't look dangerous at all. Donald Neilson appeared. Ordinary, quiet, polite. He lived a simple life with his family in the north of England. Neighbors knew him as a reserved man who kept to himself. No one suspected that behind this calm exterior was a man who would become known as the Black Panther, one of Britain's most feared criminals. Neilson was born in 1936. His childhood was strict and emotionally cold. From an early age, he struggled to connect with people. He felt overlooked, ignored, and deeply resentful of authority. While others built careers and families, Neilson felt trapped in a life he hated. What made him truly dangerous was not rage, but patience. He didn't act impulsively. He planned. He watched. He waited. By the early 1970s, Neilson began targeting post offices, knowing they handled cash but had minimal security. He studied staff routines, delivery schedules, and escape routes. His robberies were fast, controlled, and terrifying. He wore dark clothing, gloves, and a balaclava. Witnesses described his calm voice, his confidence, and the way he never hesitated. He often carried a firearm, not to scare but to dominate. Soon, newspapers gave him a name, the Black Panther. The name came from how he moved silently, struck quickly, and vanished without a trace. Police were confused. There were no fingerprints, no clear suspects, no predictable pattern. Each robbery seemed perfectly executed. Neilson left nothing behind, except fear. But the robberies were only the beginning. Behind the scenes, Neilson was growing more ambitious. He believed small robberies were beneath him. He wanted something bigger, something that would finally make him feel powerful. That desire would soon push him into crimes far darker and far more violent. And when he crossed that line, innocent lives would be lost. As the robberies continued, Donald Neilson became bolder and more dangerous. In January 1975, during a robbery at a post office in Bradford, things went wrong. A police officer attempted to intervene. Neilson did not panic. He raised his gun and fired. The officer, PC Richard Waugh, was killed instantly. Britain was shocked. This was no longer a series of robberies. A police officer had been murdered in cold blood. The Black Panther was now a cop killer. The police response intensified immediately. Armed patrols increased. Surveillance was expanded. But Neilson remained invisible. Instead of slowing down, he escalated. Neilson began to believe that robbery alone wouldn't give him the money or control he wanted. He became obsessed with kidnapping for ransom. He studied famous cases and convinced himself he could do it better. In December 1975, he targeted Leslie Whittle, a 17-year-old heiress whose family owned a successful business. Neilson broke into her home at night. He abducted her at gunpoint. For her family, it was a nightmare. For Neilson, it was a test of dominance. He demanded a ransom and carefully controlled communication. But what the family didn't know was that Leslie was being held in a remote drainage shaft, dark, freezing, and deadly. Neilson had tied her to a ladder deep underground. She was alone, cold, terrified. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about power, and soon his control would collapse. As police worked desperately to save Leslie Whittle, Donald Neilson made critical mistakes, communication errors, impatience, overconfidence. When ransom instructions failed, Neilson panicked. He believed the police were close. Instead of releasing Leslie, he abandoned her. Tragically, she fell from the ladder into the darkness below. By the time police discovered the location, it was too late. Leslie Whittle was dead. Britain was devastated. The public outrage was intense. The Black Panther was no longer just a criminal. He was a monster. Now police had one priority: catch him at any cost. Investigators re-examined every robbery, every witness statement, every tiny detail. Patterns began to emerge. This time, Neilson had left something behind. Small mistakes, behavioral clues, geographical links. The net was tightening, and Neilson didn't realize it yet. But his freedom was almost over. In December 1975, police surveillance finally paid off. Neilson was spotted during another attempted robbery. Armed officers moved in carefully. They knew he was dangerous. They knew he would not surrender easily. When confronted, Neilson opened fire. A violent gun battle followed, but this time, the Black Panther had nowhere to run. He was shot and captured alive. In custody, Neilson showed no remorse. He spoke calmly, coldly, as if discussing someone else's crimes. When confronted with evidence, he didn't deny it. He simply admitted everything. The robberies, the murder, the kidnapping. For the families of the victims, justice had finally arrived, but it could never undo the damage. Donald Neilson was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a recommendation that he never be released. The judge described him as one of the most dangerous men Britain had ever seen. Neilson spent decades behind bars, refusing interviews, avoiding attention, and remaining isolated, just as he had been his entire life. His case changed how British police handled armed robberies and kidnappings. New protocols were created, surveillance improved, negotiation strategies evolved, but the human cost remained unforgettable. P.C. Richard Waugh, Leslie Whittle, families destroyed forever. Donald Neilson sought power and control, but in the end, he achieved only one thing: a permanent place in Britain's darkest criminal history, and a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones who look completely ordinary. After the trial ended and the headlines faded, Donald Neilson disappeared from public view. The man once feared across Britain was locked away behind prison walls. But the questions surrounding him never went away. Who was Donald Neilson really? To many, he was simply a criminal. A robber, a murderer, a kidnapper. But to investigators and psychologists, Neilson represented something far more disturbing. A man driven not by desperation, but by control. In prison, Neilson lived quietly. He avoided attention. He refused interviews. Unlike many criminals who seek notoriety, he showed no interest in fame. Guards described him as calm, disciplined, and emotionally distant. He followed routines strictly, rarely spoke to other inmates, and spent long hours alone. This behavior only deepened the mystery. Psychologists who studied his case concluded that Neilson suffered from a severe personality disorder. He lacked empathy. He viewed people not as human beings, but as objects to be controlled or removed if they stood in his way. He did not commit crimes for excitement or emotional release. He committed them because they made him feel superior. This was especially clear in the kidnapping of Leslie Whittle. Neilson had planned the crime meticulously. The location, the restraints, the communication. But what he failed to understand was human unpredictability. When pressure increased and things did not go according to plan, he reacted with cold abandonment rather than remorse. Leslie Whittle's death was not an accident in the traditional sense. It was the result of Neilson's complete disregard for life. Even years later, he never expressed genuine regret. For the families of the victims, the pain never faded. P.C. Richard Waugh's family lost a husband, a father, a son, a man who died doing his duty. Leslie Whittle's family lost a daughter, whose life ended in unimaginable fear and isolation. Their grief became part of Britain's collective memory. Neilson's crimes forced major changes in how British police handled armed robberies and kidnappings. Firearms units were expanded. Surveillance techniques improved. Hostage negotiation procedures became more structured. A warning about underestimating quiet individuals. A warning about crimes driven by control rather than emotion. And a warning about how patience and planning can make a criminal far more dangerous than anger ever could. Donald Neilson spent the rest of his life in prison. He aged quietly, far removed from the fear he once created. While the public moved on, his victims never truly could. True crime stories often focus on the criminal, but the real story is always about the people left behind, the families who carry loss, the officers who risk their lives, and the communities forever changed. Donald Neilson wanted power. In the end, he lost everything, and history remembers him not as a mastermind, but as a reminder of how ordinary appearances can hide extraordinary evil.